Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Adventures in DevOps that might be live. I'm not actually sure. We're using some new software today and it says I'm streaming. So if you're watching this live, cool. I hope I don't say anything stupid and foolish. I'm excited today to have as my guest Jack. Jack, welcome to the show. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, hey Jonathan, pleasure to be here. Maybe live or maybe not,
Maybe
as the
live.
case may be. But yeah, pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me on the podcast. My name is Jack McCurdy. I am a DevOps advocate at a company called Gearset. We are a DevOps platform for Salesforce. So my background over the last 4.5 years has been helping Salesforce development teams streamline their release management practices when it comes to Salesforce development. Worked for Gearset for 4.5 years, doing exclusively that, and the last year and a half in my role as a DevOps advocate, and that involves producing content. I run my own podcast as well, which is called DevOps Diaries, and I present the whole wide range of Salesforce community events and Salesforce events that you find in that ecosystem.
Cool. I'm looking forward to learning a little bit about Salesforce and DevOps. But before we dive into that, let's set the stage a little bit. I imagine that many of our audience know as much or less than I do about Salesforce. So let me just sort of paint the picture of what I understand Salesforce to be and my experience with it, and then you can sort of fill in the gaps. So
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
not to start the show off on a bitter note, but I lost my job to Salesforce once.
Oh no.
It was okay. I was actually ready to leave the company anyway, but I was managing an e-commerce team, and we got the entire team got basically outsourced to Salesforce. Uh, Now, almost the entire team. My predecessor, no, sorry, my successor, he's still there actually, and manages the company and works with the Salesforce team. That's mostly outsourced. It's mostly a consultancy to, of course, update Salesforce and so on. But I don't really have a clear sense of what he does or what they do with Salesforce. I mean, I know that Salesforce is a CRM. I'm not a salesy guy. I don't really keep track of customer client relationships. So, a CRM is sort of a nebulous concept to me in the first place. And I imagine many of our DevOps listeners kind of feel the same way. Like, that's the thing the marketing guys talk about or the sales guys talk about. Can you make it concrete? Like, what is Salesforce from a technical standpoint, and how do Salesforce developers and DevOps engineers and so on interact with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you're right. So Salesforce primarily is a CRM, so a platform used for managing the relationships with our customers, managing how they market to them, how they store their data, how they use their data to enable other business functions. So that's where Salesforce kind of starts, and that's kind of the core platform that a lot of companies use Salesforce for, is the management of those relationships. However, Salesforce isn't just a CRM anymore. So Salesforce over the last 20 years, founded 21, 22 years ago or so now, has grown, and the Salesforce suite of products now is huge. So you have solutions for sales, for customer service, for e-commerce, for marketing, for a whole bunch of things. Salesforce seem to bring out a new product or a new what they call cloud it feels like every month, but it's not often nothing every month, but a different cloud that enables you to do different things. So what it is about at its core is unifying the customer experience for any business. But a lot of people will use it. That commonly use it will be in a sales team, in a marketing team, or a customer success or service team. So that's kind of the foundation of what Salesforce is. Now, if we think about what Salesforce development teams do specifically and how that relates to DevOps, so Salesforce is out of the box solution. So you can buy Salesforce, you can buy one of their clouds, and use that cloud to start doing things with your customers. So you'll have a base product effectively, and Salesforce developers and Salesforce, what we call admins or Salesforce administrators, can configure their company's Salesforce instance to do any number of bespoke functions or execute bespoke business workflows. So say a lead comes into your company and you want to nurture that lead, and how your sales reps or service reps interact with that customer. You can design bespoke workflows based on what your company objectives and goals are and how you market to those people, etc. So that's the responsibility of a Salesforce administrator and then a Salesforce developer. A lot more of the Salesforce developers will write custom code and custom logic to match those business objectives and things like that, as well as increase the extensibility of the platform so that you can have custom websites for customers or custom experiences for those customers as well. So that's the core function of a Salesforce developer on the platform. When it comes to DevOps and traditional DevOps doesn't really apply to Salesforce because Salesforce hosts all the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So things like standard security, standard scalability, and all those things are actually taken care of for you by Salesforce anyway, as a platform as a service. Now, where DevOps comes into the mix is all about the release management and how you can seamlessly ship new features and the functionality and that extensibility that I was just mentioning about the platform to your Salesforce end users. So DevOps is an integral part of the release management cadence. So developers may used to be using version control systems, may have experience using CI tooling and things like that, whereas a Salesforce administrator doesn't. So a lot of the Salesforce platform is clicks not code interface and clicks not code building rather than custom scripting or writing Apex code, which is Salesforce's development language. And as a result, the methods of getting those customizations from a developer environment or what you call a sandbox in Salesforce. So this is like a testing environment or a staging environment, if you will. Getting those changes out to a live production system in Salesforce can be quite challenging, and that's why companies like Gearset exist to help with that process and help you build automations to get it through however many stages of sandboxes you have and out into a live environment. So Salesforce DevOps is a little bit atypical to what the listeners of this podcast will be more familiar with when you think about DevOps.
Okay, fascinating. So is Salesforce development similar to, say, developing against a Google API or something like that, or is it more defined? Like I imagine there's APIs that you can talk to within Salesforce, but maybe it's more sandbox or something like that. I don't know. Maybe you can make that more clear.
If we think about a typical piece of work that a developer might do. So a request might come from the business and say, we want to execute this flow inside of our Salesforce environment when a lead moves from this stage to this stage. This Salesforce developer or Salesforce admin, sometimes depending on skill sets, etc., and what's actually required, will pick up that ticket, and they will operate in a sandbox environment which somewhat mimics the production environment and the real life environment. What they'll do is they'll then add their customizations either directly in that developer environment using the clicks not code interface that Salesforce has. If custom scripting is required, then the developer will be involved, and they will build that, and then they will test it and make sure it works in their developer environment. And then what they will do is they will then look to ship that and push that to a testing, and usually another testing environment. So this will be an environment that is a lot closer to the live production environment. And best practice is for most orgs to have what they would call a UAT or staging or pre-prod sometimes. The naming convention varies org to org. And then that will be tested against to make sure that those new customizations that you've added will then be able to work with everything else that already exists. So it's very common for Salesforce to be integrated with other ERPs or billing systems and things like that. So making sure that any customization that happens doesn't break those integrations and integrations with other APIs before then shipping those changes out to production and for the end users to to play with. How long that process takes varies wildly from organization to organization. So a lot of the larger enterprise companies will only release to production every 2 weeks, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Smaller organizations or more agile organizations will be able to ship changes once a week, a couple times a week, or maybe every day, depending on how their DevOps process is set up and how fast that they can run through the testing requirements that Salesforce has itself, or their self-imposed testing requirements, or any user acceptance testing that they might want to do as well. So Salesforce development happens all like within the Salesforce platform. Salesforce gives you plenty of customizability. You can extend that customizability with custom code, and then make Salesforce what you want it to be. No two Salesforce are the same, unless you so happen to have two organizations using just Sales Cloud or Marketing Cloud or Service Cloud right out the box with no customizations. You can do that, but it's not recommended. It's probably not only going to be basically fit for purpose.
Okay. I'm curious. So you talked about some organizations will release every 2 weeks, some as frequently as once a day, or maybe multiple times per day. Is the ideal of continuous delivery and deployment, like in the sense that a developer makes a change and everything else from that point on is automatic, tests run automatically, everything's automatic and is deployed as soon as everything is green? Is that realistic within Salesforce, or not, for the reasons you were describing?
That's a great question, and I might get myself in trouble with the answer here. Can you do it? Yes. Should you do it? Probably not. So everything from that initial development shipped to the first testing environment, everything else theoretically can then be automated, and wait for every green check to go if you have a robust process and if you have confidence in that process as well. If any of those checks fail, it could be a fallback and it goes back to the developer for review. Sure. And say all those green lights are green, theoretically you could have a stage that automatically pushes to a production environment. The problem with pushing Salesforce production environment live is when that happens. So when that happens without pressing a button to say go to production, a lot of the times you will want to deploy to Salesforce production environment outside of user working hours or typical user working hours, to make sure that if something does go wrong, you can implement your rollback strategy, or things don't just change under a user's feet. So the key thing about Salesforce is in every organization a tier 1 business critical application. So if you accidentally take it down by having an automated deployment process and something does go wrong, even if all the green lights pass, something doesn't work as anticipated, you skip a user acceptance testing and your new business logic doesn't quite work as anticipated, confuses users. You take out your core business application, which can sometimes be 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 users, prevents them from doing their job. So theoretically, yes, it is possible. Like a platform like Gearset or our competitors out there should be able to enable that for you. However, in terms of best practice and the realistic vision for what Salesforce is used for in every organization, that often makes it not practical. What you can do, however, is do all of those green light checks and validate against production as well. So Salesforce has a function where you can validate a deployment package of new features to production and allow you to be able to then quick deploy that at a time of your choosing. So everything up until that last stage can be automated to some extent. Where the Salesforce development is atypical. Often the less mature delivery teams won't use something like version control. So a lot of the listeners here will be used to working with version control, and that's your de facto development method, working in those branches. But because Salesforce is a live, continually live environment, production can actually be edited as as it is by a
Mm-hmm.
Salesforce administrator. If you have the permissions, you're not dealing with, it's not we have an application and we're going to ship an update to it and then you get the new version of the application. The application is always live. So Salesforce's source of truth, if you like, this is a big argument in the Salesforce DevOps world, is what is your source of truth? Because technically the source of
Uh-huh.
truth is production as it is currently live, whereas teams that are developing in a source-driven method, your source-driven method will always be a few steps ahead of production just by the nature of development. But your source of truth
Mm-hmm.
technically is as it currently exists.
Got it. So, how long have you been doing your podcast?
So I've been doing my podcast I started in November of last
Okay.
year.
All right. So a year approximately.
Yeah.
So that should give you a pretty good amount of time to answer my next question, which is going to be, what are some of the biggest challenges that come up for whether it's of perception or technical challenges, whatever? What are some of the biggest challenges that DevOps people face when interacting with Salesforce and Salesforce deployments and teams?
Yeah. So try and pick just one. Huh? So I think the word that you used there was perception, and the perception is, for a lot of folks, that Salesforce DevOps is quite difficult. To be able to do Salesforce DevOps really well and really effectively, it does involve implementing version control. It does then extend to automating parts of that, and the foundations of that tends to be version control. I've mentioned already a couple of times, Salesforce has a clicks not code interface, and that's how the majority of Salesforce development work is done. So Salesforce, if we look at the history of the platform and how work traditionally went, it started with clicks not code, like that was all the rage. Salesforce, you then started to see folks move away from that, and the more bespoke business processes were requested. Developers and coding became quite heavily important. So there's Salesforce orgs out there that are so heavily customized with custom code that those orgs can become fairly unmanageable, and that obviously increases the complexity of the DevOps process and all the checks and balances that need to happen, and making sure that code is maintained. But over the last couple of years, Salesforce internally have been doing this really big push to use a lot more of the native functionality that's built into the platform that they've built for you, to revert to that with clicks not code messaging. So so as a result, a lot of the Salesforce ecosystem, I don't really want to put a figure on it, but I would say a good 60 to 70% of Salesforce administrators or developers, for example, don't have experience coding, which as a result makes that barrier to entry for adopting DevOps best practices quite difficult. Because version control, when you're trying to wrap your head around it, is, I remember when I first started at Gear, so I don't have a tech background, like I'm not a developer myself. When I came to Gearset 4.5 years ago, I had to wrap my head around version control and what Salesforce DevOps best practices looked like in comparison to how our engineers were working. And version control is quite a scary concept. And that barrier for entry, that initial barrier to entry, I think is quite high. And that learning curve can be quite steep. And that's something that we've made quite a concerted effort to do at Gearset, is build a platform. So we have a learning platform related to Salesforce DevOps called DevOps Launchpad, which highlights version control fundamentals, how to get started with version control for Salesforce, and things like that. But that barrier to entry can be quite high. I think the other biggest challenge for any Salesforce team looking to change the way they're working is a cultural thing. So this is where, I have a counterpart at Gearset called Rob. He is a Salesforce developer and architect by trade, and that's his background. He's super technical, whereas a lot of my career, I focused a lot more on business change and culture change. And there is this, in a lot of teams, this process inertia. We've always done it this way, and we're so scared of this thing DevOps looks quite hard and quite difficult to implement. And we've always done it this way. Yeah, it's pretty painful, but it works. It's not optimal, but it works. That we've always done it this way mindset can be quite hard to change, because typically a lot of teams tend to be risk averse. There's a lot of challenges on the platform as it is. Let's not mess with anything. So driving people to see and envision that there is a better way of doing things, it requires a little bit of upfront work and a bit of upfront effort to change, but it can be done, I think, is one of the other biggest challenges and drivers behind that. So yeah, that cultural piece is absolutely huge, and it starts with the people. So, but if you have the people there and you invest in the people and their learning journey, the importance of Salesforce DevOps and the benefits of Salesforce DevOps and users getting features faster and things like that really starts to come into the fold. If you have, I guess, executive sponsorship is a big thing. The exec sponsor's you've got to have somebody that says, yes, this is a good idea from a slightly higher level, and especially in those larger teams, to say, hey, yeah, we do want to do this. We do want to improve everybody's lives. We want to, at the end of the day, improve our end users' lives. And, adopting best practice DevOps does change the Salesforce delivery team's lives. It was a common thing. So I used to sell Gearset's products. I used to be an account executive and help build the sales team at Gearset. Commonly, I would speak to Salesforce teams, and their developers and admins would be up at 2-3 a.m. in the morning doing a deployment. It would take 10 hours to do a production deployment because of how quirky and challenging the system is to deal with. And then when they implement a solution like Gearset, for example, or any of our competitors, that brings it down to do it 2 hours. And being able to go home at 7 p.m. on a Friday rather than 11 p.m. Those are very, very real life stories that you hear pretty frequently in this space. So yeah, that was a bit of a rambly answer to what was a fairly simple question.
No, it wasn't a simple question. I mean, it's a simple question, but I expected a fair amount of nuance. Pardon me. Give me one moment.
You're okay.
Cold and flu season is not being kind to me. All right. I'm curious, maybe, I don't know how much you want to talk about your career, but I'm curious how you got interested in DevOps in Salesforce. How did you talk about being an account executive, and so you sounds like your career's taken more of a technical turn at some point. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's a really interesting story. I think so. My background prior to Gearset was I did a bunch of different things beforehand, but predominantly I did retail sales. I did some work for a local utilities company. And the job that I had before Gearset was as a recruiter. So I specialized in building architecture and design, not architecture as we as IT people think about architecture. So I did that for 3 years, and an opportunity came up to work at Gearset in the early days. So Gearset was 30 odd people when I joined the company in March of 2019. An opportunity came up to be a recruiter. So spoke to the CEO and went through that whole process, and they ended up going with somebody else for the recruiter role. And the CEO turned to me and he said, "We're giving it to somebody else with a little bit more experience based on what we need and what we do, but we really like you and think you could do a good job on our sales team. Do you want to come and do that instead?" And at this point, I was just like, I was sold on Gearset. Like the company, the culture was amazing, and I really wanted to be a part of that. And entry into a tech startup, is what a lot of folks are striving for these days. Tech startups seem to be one of the places that a lot of people strive for, especially coming out of college or university these days. Anyway, so yeah, so why not? I'll take a shot. So came to Gearset, joined the company. We were about 30 people back then, and when I say sales, but like don't turn off when I say sales, folks that are listening. So we're not that scary, I promise. But sales at Gearset was a little bit different back then. So whilst my title was account executive, what we were really was an account executive and a solution engineer kind of wrapped up into one. So we as account executives did the demos. So often folks, if you've ever been on a product demo for any of the other software that you might be investigating or currently use, you will have an account executive that does a bit of a pitch and a bit of a sale. And then that will get taken over by a sales or a solution engineer, which will then demo the product and talk to you about the technical nuance of the tool and the platform and the problems that you're solving. At Gearset, we were account executives and solution engineers all in one. So me and my colleague, a few of my colleagues were that. And the sales team, so as a result of that, I got quite embedded into the technical issues that folks face on the platform. Growing startup kind of wore different hats in customer success as well. So often in the early days, I would be doing customer support as well when I had a spare minute and we needed support, because all of our support is done via Intercom, which is a chat widget in the app itself. So in the early days, I'd be in there and helping debug issues with customers that they might be facing. So a lot of the early days working for a startup gave me a lot of exposure to a lot of different things rather than just doing sales. So I helped grow the sales team there, helped implement different selling motions and things like that. And I was just like, there's some things that I like. There's some things that I really like about this job and like what I do, and there's some things that I don't like. How can I do all the things that I like doing and try and abstract what I don't enjoy as much? And that's how I came to have the job that I have now. So I enjoy educating folks on DevOps. I enjoy presenting. Public speaking though it was terrifying in the beginning, it's something that I've grown to quite enjoy. And being able to interact with folks in this space has been really fun, and is really fun. And I think it's one of those things that you embed yourself into an environment that fosters these best practices. And then, like I say, I have a colleague Rob who is far more technical than I am, can actually code. We have skills that complement each other, so I have a lot more experience in pitching and speaking in a way that an executive will understand and translate it to business value, as well as having enough technical knowledge that a developer or an architect or things like that will also listen to me and have a different. So being able to have two different styles of conversations to translate value, I guess, for everybody involved, and that's kind of how it kind of developed. I still haven't tried to write or script anything. Maybe that's something that I do in a bit of downtime, but I'm quite fortunate to be supported by my colleague Rob, who handles the more technical side of the topics that we cover. And a lot of what I do is based on extracting value. So I mentioned earlier in the podcast that Salesforce is a tier 1 business application. Companies run their businesses on it at the end of the day, and being able to get the most value out of that platform is hyper important for them. And Salesforce DevOps and good DevOps practices not only enables change faster, so digital transformation and change management are huge buzzwords, and DevOps and poor DevOps is actually a really big innovator for that inhibitor of that happening in our space. So being able to speak to executives in that way to help them get the most business value out of what is an expensive platform. Like Salesforce isn't cheap. It's probably the biggest expenditure in any enterprise organization. So that is super important, and something that I'm passionate about is helping those folks being able to do their jobs faster, make their lives happier. Like again, the amount of stories I get told about this was such a pain or is such a pain, it's causing us stress and sleepless nights, and you implement a solution to remedy that pain, and it really gives a quality of life back to people's jobs. So that's kind of a bit of the journey that I've been on, and we'll continue on.
Sleep-driven development is a powerful motivator, isn't
it? Coffee-driven development, I think, is the most common type of development I see. So yeah. If our engineering team is anything to go by anyway, so.
I'm curious to learn a little bit more about Gearset. I mean, obviously, Gearset sells services related to Salesforce, but can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit? What does Gearset do? who would hire Gearset and what for?
Yeah, so Gearset actually has an interesting story. So Gearset, as it exists right now, we are an all-in-one Salesforce DevOps platform for companies that use Salesforce. So when you're thinking about how do we protect our org, how do we make sure it's backed up? Should we have like a production disaster or what have you? We have a backup service if you need to move data between environments for testing or for any other reason, then we have tooling to do that. We have CI tooling, automation tooling, pipeline development pipelines, like you would set up in Bitbucket, or an action similar to things like GitHub Actions. We have tooling for Salesforce specifically. But the Gearset journey is really interesting because Gearset was founded by so Kevin and Matt were software engineers at a company called Redgate. You might be familiar with Redgate, or if Redgate sounds familiar, the reason for that is because they're a company based out of Cambridge, UK, which is where Gearset is headquartered, that that have database DevOps tooling for Microsoft tools, SQL Server, things like that. So when Redgate were looking at Salesforce and doing their own Salesforce implementation, they were just like, oh, there must be a better way to do all of this than what Salesforce gives you out of the box. And that's how Gearset was founded. It was founded by, we're used to being able to do all these cool things for the Microsoft products that we make tooling for. Let's see if we can do it for Salesforce. So bringing that engineering culture to Salesforce and Salesforce DevOps specifically is how Gearset's founded. So one of Redgate's flagship products is SQL Compare, which allows you to compare side by side those databases, and that's where Gearset started, being able to compare what's in a sandbox environment versus what's in a production environment, which can drift dramatically in Salesforce development. So that's kind of the journey, and through. So our CEO is a software engineer by background. Our CPO is a software engineer by background. We are a company that's grown from software development best practices as it is anyway. And I think that's where Gearset is kind of set apart from our competitors in this space, is we are really best practice engineering first, and making lives Salesforce developers, Salesforce administrators, Salesforce architects, Salesforce DevOps engineers, all of those people's lives better.
Awesome. Cool. One other question I have before I ask, well, getting ahead of myself. If anybody listening is interested in learning to do Salesforce development, do you have any suggestions or direction tips for them to consider?
Yeah, I do. So the great thing about Salesforce and Salesforce development in particular is anybody can learn it, and anybody can learn it for free. So Salesforce have this amazing, it's like an academy, if you like. So it's called Trailhead. So Trailhead is a learning platform for any Salesforce professional, which will allow you to go and learn the basics of Salesforce. It'll teach you how to code Apex for Salesforce. You can go and it's all self-learning. Trailhead.com, create a free account. There's mascots and fun trails, and you get your own environments to build all of these things in, and you can learn so much about the platform. So if you're interested in Salesforce development and what Salesforce is used for, and the hundreds of applications that you can apply to the business, then Trailhead is definitely the place to go. If you're interested in Salesforce DevOps and how that is different in comparing to what you currently do, or getting best development practices, then DevOpsLaunchpad.com is the place to go. So caveat, that is a platform that Gearset have created as well as our learning platform. However, it is agnostic, so it is all about Salesforce DevOps and the different flavors of that and what's involved. Yes, of course, there's Gearset courses on how to use a Gearset product on there, but the learning journey is super agnostic when it comes to learning version control best practices and things like that for the platform. But yeah, Trailhead, anybody can go and learn Salesforce and develop on Salesforce with the Trailhead platform. It's one of those things that Salesforce is such an incredible platform because of that low barrier to entry to learn Salesforce and that clicks not code mentality. So many people from every different background can get involved. So folks from underrepresented groups and things like that have a free platform that they can use to start a career in tech, and like it routinely changes people's lives. So there's a number of great nonprofit organizations out there, like Pep Up Tech or Merivis for veterans, that have learning programs dedicated to Salesforce to give people that leg up into technology, because Salesforce has a guidance valuation of 36 billion or something like that as a company for next year, and the ecosystem around that will be many billions more. So it's an industry where there's a lot of money to be made and there's a lot to go around, and you can start a career in Salesforce fairly easily. It will take drive and determination if folks aren't already in that space, because it is competitive, and a lot of people career transitioning, they see it as a golden ticket, I guess. But with a bit of determination and hard work, all the resources out there, you just got to go and get it.
Awesome. Is there anything else that I should ask you about, or anything important that we should discuss that I haven't before we move towards the end of the program?
It's all important. I think the biggest thing for for folks either looking at Salesforce, if we think about Salesforce DevOps, like in particular, like there is Salesforce DevOps is a challenge. So I would encourage anybody that's listening to this podcast or to take a look at Salesforce DevOps. And I think there is probably a gap for Salesforce DevOps specific engineers and people with a really good DevOps background to go in and learn a little bit more about Salesforce, and then help a team transform what they're doing internally with that little bit of understanding. There will be frustrations because of the way that Salesforce works and some of the API limitations and things like that. However, that methodology wise, I think there is generally a gap for. In larger enterprises, you're going to see folks with that kind of knowledge anyway, and a lot of like previously in working here, I've done liaison with internal DevOps teams that don't understand why things have to be done a certain way in Salesforce, and that relationship management is really important when you think about DevOps for Salesforce. But like things like implementing robust testing, so not just the testing that Salesforce makes you do. So Salesforce has testing. You have to have tests written for all your custom code, and you have to have code coverage above a certain percentage and things like that. So it's like mandatory testing in Salesforce. But the more that you can do in terms of setting up a robust testing strategy for security and load testing and testing that make sure that your functional testing and the user regression testing and things like that, those things and how that's incorporated into the process and where those kind of things start, and best practices that can be taken from software development and applied to a Salesforce team can be really powerful, especially if you have this. It's not uncommon to see 3 or 4 teams working on Salesforce and they all have different processes, so being able to unify and govern processes is really important. So there are challenges in the Salesforce space that I think can be solved by DevOps engineers from a traditional background, if you will. So it's really interesting. It's not for everybody, not for everybody for sure, but there are a lot of interesting challenges and a lot of things that can be solved by driven people in this space for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Jack, how can people get in touch with you? Are you on social media? Obviously, you have a podcast. Now's your chance to tell us all the places where you live on the internet.
Yeah, sure. So you can hear more of my voice. Actually, probably slightly less of my voice. I usually let the guests do a lot of the talking. It's just that the shoe's been on the other foot today, which is quite strange. My podcast, or Gearset's podcast, DevOps Diaries, which I host, is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those good places. Exciting times as I've recently rehashed the format and have recorded a few video episodes, which will be on YouTube as well. You'll be able to see that on the Gearset YouTube channel. But yeah, DevOps Diaries, I talk a lot about Salesforce DevOps in particular with my guests, but I also have guests come on and talk about cultural changes and things like that as well, talking about their kind of career journeys and burnout, mental health, and all those kind of things are featured on the podcast as well. All the things that I think good DevOps can contribute towards improving, for sure. You can find me on X or Twitter if you like it, so _JXCKMCC, providing Elon hasn't burnt it down in the next couple of weeks with its new valuation that came out today, which is half of what he bought it for. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well. So I post a lot across both Twitter and LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, Jack, thanks for coming on. I feel like I've learned quite a bit. One last thing before we end the program. On this show, we like to do picks. So I don't know if you have anything you want to pick. I have one thing I will pick. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
You go first.
I'll go first. Okay. So I'm going to pick a book. I listened to the audio format. It's called The Art of Action: How Leaders Close the Gaps Between Plans, Actions, and Results. And it was a really fascinating book. It's about, well, how do I say what it's about? It's sort of some case studies dating back to pre-World War I military operations and how they can apply to business with regard to sort of a bias for action, or how we can interact, how we can, well, as the subtitle says, bridge the gap between plans, actions, and results. So it's kind of the antidote, in a sense, or one possible antidote to the strict top-down hierarchy approach that Taylorism may be promoted. So it really ties in with the ideology of Agile and DevOps and all this sort of stuff, which is why I'm bringing it up on this show. So it's an interesting book. If you like history and you like business, this is the perfect book because it really ties those two together for you. So that's my pick for the week: The Art of Action by Stephen Bungay, I think is how you say his name. So that's my pick.
Cool. I am going to take a little bit of a different angle. So my pick is going to be actually what I watched on Netflix last night.
Awesome.
So I watched Pain Hustlers on Netflix last night. I thought it was fantastic. So Pain Hustlers is based on the true story of a company's rise while selling a fentanyl spray, and how their business practices contributed to the opioid crisis in the United States. I think the best way I can kind of describe it is it's a toned down version of The Wolf of Wall Street, but the toned down version of Wolf of Wall Street, but it's shot really well. The interpersonal relationships in that movie are fantastic, and there's some really great acting. It's directed by David Yates, so if you're a Harry Potter fan and like what he did with that, this is a certainly more grounded and based version of his way of storytelling, which I thought was really excellent. So yeah, Pain Hustlers on Netflix, would 10 out of 10 recommend.
Awesome. I'll check it out. Once again, thanks, Jack. It's been a pleasure. Hope to chat to you again soon.
Jonathan, thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.